the Isle of Rum, a national nature reserve in the Inner Hebrides off the west coast of Scotland. It's 4 o'clock in the morning on the longest day of the year. I've returned to Rum to see the native woodlands I studied and photographed in my PhD during the 1980s.
This is Glen Shellersder, and I'm down here to see the relict woodland, which is just behind us there along that ravine where the little burn comes down into the glen. And it's important in terms of the woodland conservation on the island of Rum, because it's a place that basically deer couldn't get to. And prior to that, there was a lot of sheep on the island. The sheep replaced the people. The people had to leave the island and go live in North America. Sheep came along, the sheep were taken out when the Nature Conservancy Council took over the whole island as a nature reserve. There is inevitably a conflict between woodland management and deer, and so the woodland plots on the island have been fenced off. They're deer proof to allow them to grow from seedlings, because without that fence the deer would eat them away. But they can't do that here because it's too steep, it's too rocky, deer don't want to go there. And so this relict has survived. And we do know from the pollen record, we know from old studies and maps that Rum used to be really green, very much a woodland island. The Vikings knew it as a woodland island, and much of that woodland disappeared because of burning and then sheep grazing and deer grazing. But we know from the studies in places like this relict what kind of tree species grew on the island, and that was very important information for Peter Wormel and his team to start collecting those seeds and growing them in a nursery in Kinloch, and then eventually planting them out. You might be wondering why I'm dressed like this. I've got gloves, I've got my coat sleeves tight up, and I've got a net over my wide-brimmed hat. It's because of the horseflies, the black flies, the midges, and even though we're in an open glen here, they're driving me crazy. I didn't know that filming was going to be so difficult as this, but they're all over the lens, they're all over the camera, they're all over me, and no matter, even though I've got the net on, I've got the smidge, the midge repellent, they're still getting in there, they're still getting into my eyes, and it's very, very irritating. But at least it's sort of even getting in my mouth. But at least it keeps some of them out. I better get some water. This is Kilmorey Fag. It's one of the plots that I studied in the 80s. It's still fenced off though, so the deer are still not getting in. This was my favourite spot. I thought it would turn into a really good woodland. And I'm not disappointed.
Maybe as much as 40% of Rum used to be woodland. Its destruction likely began when Mesolithic hunter-gatherers arrived over 8,000 years ago. When Rum was established as a National Nature Reserve in 1957, the moorland burning was stopped and the remaining 2,000 or so black-faced sheep were removed. Woodland restoration began in 1958 using 26 native species. By 1985, over 800,000 trees and shrubs had been planted in over 1,400 hectares of land. For many years, I thought that this large boulder was an erratic, a rock left in the landscape after the last ice age around 10,000 years ago. Maybe that's true, but it's also been suggested that it was moved there by some of the 400 crofters who used to live on Rum. A melancholic memorial left there before they were evicted and shipped out across the Atlantic to Cape Breton, Canada, in 1826. It was a place for me to sit a while, breathe in the moorland air, listen to the wind and the bird song across the glen, and try to work out what I needed to do in my research.
This is the Northside Plantation. It's the biggest of the woodland restoration plots. It was planted out in the 1960s. There's willow and birch and alder and hazel and holly and Scots pine. They're 50 years or so old now. When I started my PhD, they were about half that age, so I'm going to see how well they've grown. So this woodland has developed so well in the 30 years or so since I was last here. There's alder, there's old gnarled trees there, there's aspen rustling in the wind, there's the Scots pine just over there. It truly is an amazing woodland now.
My research on Rum investigated environmental changes associated with the native woodland restoration program. I studied soil chemistry and ground flora communities in the young tree plots and neighbouring unplanted moorland areas. After 7 years of field work, chemical analysis of the soils and multivariate analysis of vegetation data, I was able to show that soil fertility had improved and woodland ground flora communities were forming. The last time I was on Rum was over 30 years ago. Wardens and conservation staff have moved on. Kinloch Castle has closed down and a bigger community has established itself. The old tree nursery that could produce up to 80,000 transplants annually is now a greenhouse and garden. The old post office has become Ivy Cottage, a delightful place to stay with a gorgeous view east across Loch Screesort. The tree plots have grown up to become magnificent mixed woodlands that attract a rich variety of birds. Bye for now, Rum. Until the next time.